Hi everyone, delonewolf here. Welcome back to EVE Talk, your weekly look at the market in EVE Online. And well, for me personally, the war is over, so that is pretty good. I can actually show that to you guys. Wars, the Lone Space Wolves is not currently involved in any wars. It was just a 1 week war. I did lose a Dominix, but overall I also got some other allies that wanted to help out, but I chose not to grab those. The reason was I want to experience this war from the perspective of like a more solo-oriented industry player who would be war tech, to see what kind of lessons I can learn from all of this. And well, I learned a couple, more on that later. We are here for the market, of course, and as always we are going to start with a plex, and let's press that. That is going to be at, let me look for the time here, 1 minute. Like that. And you can probably already tell from the ticker, let's put this up here, the plex have hardly moved, at least in JITA, right? For the ticker I'm using JITA prices themselves. And on the chart here we can also see 5-day moving average down a little bit, 20-day moving average pretty much flat, and then we can also see that the median daily price are basically flat as well. And so over the course of 1 week, hardly any real movement in plex. There is a little bit more volume visible, and we also know that CCP gave like 25% off on subscriptions for like 1 day, I think, for Halloween. So that was an opportunity for you guys to, of course, grab some cheaper subscriptions as well. But overall, the impact on plex seems to have been minimal, although probably that little downtrend here at the tail end may have been sparked by that. Currently, plex are being sold for 3,100,000 ISK, and the buyers are at just above 3,060,000 ISK, the first one coming in range for JITA. So I would say that it's pretty much stable at the moment, which is quite surprising. After an expansion you usually do get a movement either way, but I guess maybe looking at what else CCP is planning for after the expansion, it's actually normal that people are still holding out a little bit. You've got the massive changes to the alpha clones, where they'll be able to go cross race and go up to battleships, take 2 small and medium weapons as well. That's definitely a massive change to the game, which might have an impact on plex. And after that we've got the moon mining coming to other spaces. That's actually, from my perspective, something new, something that might actually give players something different to do in EVE Online. Whereas the current moon mining mechanic, that's definitely for the null-stick groups, and they're doing their best to get everything up and running, probably running interference with each other as well and things like that. So overall, I would say that it's a little bit of surprise that plex is hardly moving around an expansion, but we've got the future releases as well that might have an impact on all of this. The multiple pilot training certificates, that one knows a bit more of motion here apparently. I would treat this as another sale, potentially. You know, you've got another big volume spike here on a downward trend. Maybe the training certificates have been on sale as well. Going at the moment for, let's take a look at that, almost 1.5 billion, pretty damn expensive. And the buyers are at 1,355,000,000 ISK. So, well, if we look at plex here, that's a little bit above 1.5 billion as well for 30 days. So I think it's basically in line with each other if we look at the training certificates here. The hesitation here, I think, puts it in line with a normal price compared to plex. Now what I think will be more interesting will the extractors and the injectors, especially the extractors. We can clearly see from the chart here that very closely mirrors plex, and of course you can just buy plex, convert that to extractors in the store. It's not like there's a player driven or a market driven force behind any of this. It's just basically very close to one-on-one. Maybe an individual sale could do something, but other than that, the sellers are at 351 million ISK and the buyers are at 43 million ISK, so pretty narrow margin, 351 million for an extractor. It's definitely pretty expensive, but again stabilizing at the tail end here. Now the large scale injectors, that could be interesting, and that is interesting. Actually a little bit of a pullback from 800 million, but flattening out at the tail end. So I don't think that this has too much momentum, especially here again with the announcement of the alpha clones. Don't know if you guys watched the dev blog just yet, but just in a nutshell, what is interesting for the skill injector aftermarket here is that CCP realizes they can't just allow to free train all those skills either, and so alpha clones will still be restricted to a free skill training up to 5 million skill points. And if after that they want to get towards a battleship, they want to get to Tech 2 weapons and things like that, they'll have to find a way to grab those skill points, whether it is with skill injectors or by subbing for a month or 2 months. The big difference is, of course, that after that, once you've managed to train the skills for Tech 2 small weapons, for instance, or for a battleship, you'll be able to continue to fly the battleship even if you don't remain Omega. So I think that there could be quite a bit of interest in skill points here. I'm watching this pullback from the large skill injectors. I wonder if at some point 850, 900, maybe even a billion for a large skill injector may not be in the books. Not for tomorrow, but considering the alpha clones, what they'll need in order to actually get the most out of their skill points at that point, that might actually change quite substantially. The small skill injectors actually are already at the inflection point. They went from around 170 million to 160 million, and now they're back up towards 170. Sellers, oh no, actually 162 for the sellers, 155 for the buyers. That's quite interesting. We're seeing this inflection point on the chart, but it's not really showing that. Excuse me. Winter is coming, and then people tend to catch colds. But the chart, the median daily price, is putting it at 168. It actually says 0.16 billion. It's hard to say, but it's pretty close to the 170 million mark. Whereas the sellers are still coming in at like 162. Maybe Cheetah Station 166. Yeah, there is quite a bit of difference here. So, alright, interesting. We'll have to see what this does next week. But overall, the trend here is that we are in a stabilization period. Plex definitely, extractors as well, and actually a little bit of a pullback on the large scale injectors as well, which may be an opportunity. It all depends on how you're reading the alpha clone change, I think, when it comes to demand to skill points. Let's move on to some minerals at 7:30. There we go. As always, we'll start with titanium. More bad news, slight uptick in volume, and the response is lower prices. That does mean more supply coming to the market. We can take out this filter now. 490 for the sellers, and still 1.3 billion coming in, 700 million coming in as the latest order below 490. That's not good news for the price. We do have a buyer in perimeter for 1.5 billion units, but that's at 464. Actually a decent margin, and titanium is obviously under pressure, which is quite unfortunate. I mean, after the Ascension expansion, where we dropped to less than 4 ISK, we managed this nice comeback to 6 ISK for titanium. It took us a very long time, more than half a year, but we managed to stay there for a little bit, and unfortunately at this point it's the exact opposite. We have another rundown in titanium, and the price, well, 4 ISK, we know it's been possible before, so who knows, perhaps we'll see that one again as well. More bad news for pyrite, is basically staying flat at probably an all-time low, definitely a 1-year low, playing with the 5 ISK mark. Sellers coming in, the first one at 499, and it's for 1 billion units. Again, the massive dumping of minerals is just unstoppable, especially for the Isaac ones. 488 for the buyers. That's a bit less margin than with titanium, but this is very, very bad news. This is, I think, going to sustainably push pyrite under 5 ISK for the foreseeable future. Not great for us high-sec miners. Next up, we've got Mexalon, also slowly trending down, keeps hesitating, but this time we do have a median daily price below 70 ISK. Sellers coming in at 70.16 ISK, the buyers are at 69. That margin is widening again, also under pressure. Pretty obvious trend here in the minerals that since the summer, basically, there has been lots more supply than demand, and as a result, we are once again going down in price. Next up here we get Isogen, very same story. In fact, I think we're close to the 1-year low again, clearly breaking through 50 ISK at this point, and it doesn't look like we're gonna come back. Isogen is selling for 44.09. The buyers are at 42.23. Very, very cheap Isogen. Supply-wise here, you do have 90,000 being bought, but at 42.23, that is very, very cheap. And here you still have 100 million coming in here, another 20 million. This pack here is going to be another 50 million. Oversupplied like crazy. For the very long-term horizon, of course, this looks like an interesting stepping point, because it was the previous bottom where the market said enough is enough, but who knows how low we can go. Same for pyrite here. That is actually sustainable at like a 1-year low price point. Noxium, that's not going to be too pretty either. Managed to do a little bit of a comeback when it dropped down very sharply to 330 ISK, went back up to 363, but 343 ISK for the sellers, 325 for the buyers, and unfortunately 78 million here, 22 million, another 23 million coming in here. Way more supply than demand. It's the name of the game in high-sec minerals at the moment, so all of them are under pressure. That is not good news for high-sec miners. Unfortunately, you're getting less for all the effort that you're putting in mining asteroids in high-sec at the moment. Might be a good idea to look at resource wars then if you want an alternative, but it has to be said, if we look at the rewards for resource wars at the moment, just doesn't make sense to go that route for your earnings. It's gonna be even worse. Next up we have Nozick, of course. Here is Zydrine. After a little bit of a comeback to 1100 ISK, right back under pressure. This time I think it's pretty general oversupply in the mineral market. Maybe it's because all attention is on the moon goo and things like that, and all ISK is flowing in there as well. That's bound to have an impact, I think. The amount of ISK flowing into different markets. We know it's been a while now, we don't know the exact numbers at this point, but a couple of fanfests ago CCP actually said that if you would value everything, or if you would basically take all the average values that you have, convert all of that to plex, you would have like 3 or 4 times more ISK. Convert that to ISK, sorry, you would have 3 or 4 times more ISK in the game than you do now. And so that does mean that if something really shoots up and is in high interest, which Tech 2, moon mining, all of that stuff, and PI as well, of course, for the refineries, that means lots of ISK going into all of that. Lots of it also being flushed through the blueprints that have been bought. That means less ISK for other stuff, and if you then have an oversupply mineral market, you're getting hit pretty hard. That means Zydrine 1018 ISK for the sellers and 982 for the first buyer, well below 1000 ISK, pretty damn cheap, but I guess that there's just not that much ISK flowing in here. Megasite next, also under pressure, breaking 1250. We can see here again mid-September doing pretty well, 1450, something like that, 1430, and now under pressure, heading for 1150, 1161 ISK for the sellers and 1083 ISK below 1100 again, widening margin as well between sellers and buyers. It's not good news for us miners. There's little interest in our work. Personally, I would say, yeah, if you can afford to try to hold off at the moment, I would say everything that I mine, I'm going to compress it, try and bring it to the best market where I think I'll get the best price for that, but I won't refine right away at this point. I don't think it makes too much sense to try and sell in this market. Finally, we also have a Morphite. There we go, below 10k, stabilizing a little bit after having give this ground back, and currently being sold for 9,536 already. Bars 9,350. Pretty cheap, although we also know that bottoming here is not just yet, not happening just yet, because I managed to buy this like close to 8,000 ISK as well on my investment, which I had sold at this rally point here. So I think it's general trend, it's being hit by multiple things, right? We don't see the Imperium at war at the moment. That is probably going to have an impact on the mineral market. But we also see other big groups not really, you know, having all-out wars to try and conquer space or anything like that, to risking supers. All of that is not in the books at the moment, which means that there's bound to be lots of other activities happening, including mining. And I'm not saying that it's the Imperium that is flooding the market, but the market is definitely being flooded in general. Could be high-sec as well, could come from all possible sources where things are quieting down a little bit. get that more supply, get everything under pressure, and at the same time I do think lots of ISK is flowing in other markets, which leaves mineral markets in a bad place. Potential buy opportunity, maybe, but that again would require something like a pretty massive Nosik war or something like that. Next up we have our PI market at 15.15. There we go. Let's start off here. Construction blocks, I would say a little bit down on the week, but right around average. Doesn't look completely crazy in my opinion. Sellers 12,500 ISK, I would say that's right on the money for average. Buyers 11,600, a little bit below even. So if you want to sell construction blocks, I think you can still do that, but have the patience for a sell order. And the buyers 11,600, that's actually around here on the chart. You know, this could be interesting, although I would prefer to see it a little bit lower, like closer to 11,000 before I jump in on a buy order myself. Construction, consumer electronics next. Ooh, that's quite a pullback, but coming from a well above average price. I think that is pretty interesting. Again, 12,500, 11,600 for the buyers. Basically a normalization of this market as well, putting it right in line with construction blocks. I would say this is again sellers on average, buyers maybe a little bit below average. Coolants next. Also, ooh, that's a pretty sharp drop. I actually bought on this one, not too much, like 100 million worth or something like that. Just want to see if I can get a successful trade out of that. But we're staying below 10,000 ISK, so 10,100 for the sellers, 9,651 for the buyers. Average price below 10,000 ISK. Still 218,000 coming in here as well. I would say that this is probably a buy opportunity because we are at the 1 year low point. It all depends on whether or not you've got a different read on the coolant market, but this is well below average for sure. Enriched uranium next, also giving ground, heading back to that 12.5k, quite interesting. 13,500 for the sellers, 12,900 for the buyers. Well, we're not there yet, that's a little bit strange. Well, not exactly sure why. Maybe the chart needs to catch up and go back up a little bit or something. That would be my guess then. Maybe it's this volume is actually the purchasing of this last inflection here. We're actually back at 13,500 and the buyers 12,900. For enriched uranium, probably a little bit above average here. Chart right back on average, I would say. And it's actually not that easy to make enriched uranium, so you're gonna always pay a little bit of a premium compared to the other ones. The chart here though is very interesting and makes it look like you are actually very close to a buy opportunity. I think basically the chart is lagging behind a little bit and someone already bought these opportunities. Integrity response draw next, had to fall back at some point, of course. Selling now for 3.3 million, still pretty expensive. 3.1 million for the buyers. I'm hoping for a price closer to 2.5 million on the buyer side as part of my preparations for moon mining. Then hopefully I'll be able to get all of that worked out, but at the moment you're still paying a decent premium. We are of course starting to fall back. Mechanical parts next, 10,000. Oof, that again, this is starting to look like an investment opportunity. 10,250 for the sellers, 9,600 for the buyers. Quite interesting. Buyers well below 10,000 ISK. If you look at the entire chart, we're once again playing with that 1 year low. I think next trip I'm going to Jita, I'm buying some mechanical parts as well. It's again fuel related, that is quite interesting. And I think what might be happening here is the same theory I have with minerals. You know, you're getting hit by a double whammy. Not only is there oversupply, but there's less ISK flowing into these markets. And for PI, it is, I think, entirely possible that there's lots of ISK flowing into the structure related materials because you need that all those refineries up and running, which is quite a lot in Nullsec, and as a result there's just not that much ISK flowing into the fuel related PI materials. In fact, maybe even some big investors might not mind. You need lots of fuel for all of these refineries as well eventually, and so as a result they don't mind this being a little bit lower at the moment. Let's just slowly purchase, let's not bid this price up too much. Seems to be the name of the game in this market, and I would say that this, just like with coolants, creates a buy opportunity. Definitely below average if you look at the entire chart. Nuclear reactors next. That is of course one of the other parts of the other spectrum. This directly related to the structures, and so as a result, coming from a very high point, giving back a little bit of ground, but still selling for 145,000 ISK. That is quite expensive. 131 for the buyers. That's actually pretty cheap. So there you go. Still well above average, but starting to give ground, just like the response drones, for instance. Oxygen next, fuel related, staying below 450. Holy crap! Is that's early? We did just go to. Let's take a look at that. Okay, I still have 1 hour, so we're good. But here in Belgium we went to winter time, and as a result everything is off by 1 hour. So have to keep that in mind. But alright, oxygen staying below 450, so 463 for the sellers, but 430 for the buyers. I would say below average by a touch, not by much, but definitely not above average. Robotics next. This one is my favorite one, actually. Pretty damn interesting, staying at around 95,000. If you look at this entire chart, again, well below average. 96,000 for the sellers, 94,500 for the buyers. If I'm not mistaken, you can see that right here. These are my investments. I've got some construction blocks, I've got some coolants, some liquid ozone, some robotics, and some strontium clatrates as well, and I'll maybe touch on that at the end of Eve talk. But here again, robotics definitely well below average, and I think an opportunity to pick some up. Rocket fuel breaking 12,500, but nowhere near like 10k, which I would say would be the buy opportunity. So 12,900 for the sellers, 11,600 for the buyers. Pretty wide margin. Sellers a bit above average, buyers a bit below average. That's quite interesting. But I don't see this market go all too drastically in either direction right now. If it would, you know, if you see enough dumping, see this price go to like 11,500 and see this drop to 10,000, that's when I would make my move a little bit early at this point. Self-harmonizing power cores, obviously also coming from the new structure peak, so settling at, let's take a look at that, 3.2 million for the sellers, 3 million for the buyers. Still well above average. You're paying a premium, of course, because of all the interest in the refineries, all of the demand there, but it's starting to stabilize, and it will eventually, of course, go back down. Superconductors next, also back on its average, 12,500, so 13,000 for the sellers, 12,000 for the buyers. Again, very wide margin. This is quite surprising, which again could be an indication that there's not that much demand, there's not that much ISK flowing into these. So 12,000 for the buyers of superconductors. If we try and get the scaling to work, hopefully that works. Here is 12,000. That's well above average for the buyers. They're almost a buy opportunity. I'd prefer it to be a little bit lower, but not that bad actually. Test cultures next, having to give background as well, directly related to building some of those advanced PI materials. So 12,000 for the sellers, 10,700 for the buyers. Well above average still, but also starting to give back some ground. Finally, we've got the wetware mainframes, of course, advanced PI. So here again, giving back ground, actually going back below 3 million. That's quite a surprise. 2.7 million for the sellers, 2.6 for the buyers. Margin closing down, decent supply for what used to be a real bottleneck in structure production. So that those supply lines must have gone up quite substantially, or there's less demand for the specific structures that are being built. That's possible as well. I don't know those details, but this is actually a reasonable price already for wetware mainframes at this point. And I'm not sure, I'll quickly touch on it. There was a comment, I think it was for mortar applicators or something like that. Let's see if I can find it. Yeah, organic mortar applicators, part of the advanced PI material, of course, and you're getting that same pattern where you get these peaks, one on speculation, one with the expansion itself, currently being sold for 1.3 million and the buyers are at 1.26 million. Again, very narrow margin, lots of supply, and so here organic mortar applicators a little bit above average still, but already quite doable when it comes to having to purchase these. Let's move on to some Tick 1 chips next at 2440. There we go. With minerals under pressure in general, I don't think we'll see anything stand out. I'm also not all too aware of big fleets being lost at the moment, so I would say I'm expecting more stabilization here as well. The Abaddon slowly coming below 190, selling for 194, buyers 173. Again, this wide margin is a bit surprising. Availability not too great, but there are some Abaddons on the market, and here average prices, yep, sometimes below 190. You can purchase a balance for that price. The Caracal shooting back up towards 11 million after dipping quite substantially to less than that on probably some major purchases. Currently selling for 10.5 million and the buyers at 9.3 million. I would say possible theory, this definitely is an indication that there's some renewed interest in the Caracal. I would say Caracal with Tech 2 medium weapons and alpha clones. Definitely a potential strong doctrine in nullsec later on for some of the bigger groups. So I think that could be one of the reasons why we're seeing more interest in that and actually an increased price despite lower production costs. Coveter next, that is following the pattern quite nicely, dipping below 27.5 million, 27 million for the sellers, 23 million for the buyers. Pretty cheap, on some dumping as well, some more volumes coming in. The Ferox, actually, nope, I would say Ferox sometimes definitely used as a doctrine as well, but it's a battle cruiser, so that needs more minerals. That means that probably the lower mineral prices are winning out at this point, going back down to 48 million, sellers 40, well, almost 50 million, buyers 44 million. So again, decently wide gap. If supply keeps coming in, here's 1931 at less than 50 million. At some point you're bound to get another jump up because of a buyout, but looks like it's a little bit too early at this point. Next up here we get the Hurricane. After breaking 45 million, coming back just a little bit, I think that basically that does make sense. 48.6 million for the sellers, 43.5 for the buyers. We're not even seeing a volume spike, but at some point, of course, if you're starting to see Hurricanes being sold for less than 45 million, some people are gonna jump on that opportunity. The Maelstrom next, also obviously under pressure a little bit, not managing its next spike back to 190, being sold for 189.5 million, and the buyers at 160. Again, pretty wide margin, showing the lack of demand in the battleship market at the moment. Maybe alpha clones can change that, but that's not gonna be immediately, right? Battleships do take quite a bit of skill points to train into, and for alpha clones it's not gonna be that easy to just get those skill points either. So I think, yeah, that it's not going to create that much more demand. It's more going to be used for PvE, I think, at least at first, right, where you've got alpha clones that want to manage to get in there so that they've got an efficient Ratter, they've got an efficient mission runner so that they can do the level 4 missions and eventually then actually upgrade to Omega through their playtime. I think that's going to be the primary game plan for getting into battleships with an alpha clone. I don't think we'll see doctrines of that right off the bat. Prophecy next, dipping back below 50 million, is that correct? Yep, 49.7 for the sellers, 45.5 or 6 for the buyers. Not much to say here, not much demand. The site next, after dipping to, well, a very low point, close to 6.5 million. At some point, of course, you do go back up, but you hardly notice the volume increase. That's quite disappointing, but being sold for 8.4 million, buyers at 7.2 million. A bit of a comeback after really falling off a cliff to a one-year low. That's basically a pattern that can happen as well, but this doesn't mean that any actual trade money can be made on this. The Typhoon next, also just basically stabilizing above 150, not great. 158 for the sellers, first seller coming in actually, and then 149 for the buyers, buying Typhoons for less than 150 million. That's quite interesting. If again you know that the Imperium is going to go to war and they're going to use their Typhoon doctrine again, that might be interesting to try and pick up a couple of those, but it remains a pretty big gamble. And finally we have the Vexor after falling back to 10 million, actually back to 11 million. That's quite interesting. 11.5 for the sellers, 10 million for the buyers. So it's more likely that we get a bit of volume. Yeah, we've got a bit of volume here, buying everything, let's say below 11 million. And as a result, we've got this jump up in price. But the buyers, they're staying put at 10 million. That's what they want for their Vexors. interesting stuff, but not all too exciting if you're looking for trade opportunities or investment opportunities. Just knowing what the minerals are doing at the moment, Tech 1 market is pretty much dead in the water from that perspective. You need a war and you need to gamble, you need to know the doctrines that will be used in order to actually make some money there. Not easy to do at the moment. Tech 2 next at 3010. Let's take a look at that. Here the area is still very, very high, and honestly, until something changes here, I am going to also not watch the advanced moon materials too closely, although I could, but for this week I have something else planned. It's the fuel. I'm quite interested in what's happening there actually. So first of all, Aries here staying well above 35 million, 37 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. So there's not much to say here. You're still paying that premium for the expansion and changes to moon mining activities. Depending on where we go from here, if we go lower, that might be an indication that there's plenty of supply out there. If we go higher, there might be an indication that it's very easy to disrupt that supply, and we might be in more trouble for the Tech 2 market or seeing more higher prices. Claw also pretty much flat for the week at the current trade range, 36.6 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. Not much to say. Pretty expensive, of course, for an interceptor. Here's the Crow giving back ground, but basically staying flat since October here, and that would be at 32 million for the sellers and 29 for the buyers. It's in line with the other ones, in my opinion. And then, yeah, this is the gamble that you would need to take, right? Do you think that we're gonna get plenty of supplies, more supplies, or are we going to actually stay in a supply bottleneck? Then that is what's going to determine where the price will go from here. But we are in the stabilization here. Aries as well, from a very high point to 80 million, settling at 60 million, still at a pretty expensive premium. So 62 for the sellers, 48.5 for the buyers. Flycatcher also stabilizing here at a pretty damn high price point. 86 million almost for the sellers and 79 million for the buyers. That's obviously quite expensive. The Heretic actually falling back as well, but again from more than 80 million ISK. That's normal. Some sellers coming in at 80 million and 61.5 for the buyers again. The Hound here, that is the pattern, right? And the longer it stays in frigates is then also going to start to show up in the destroyers, and then also eventually in cruisers, etc. Flat at 30 million. So you're paying the expansion premium, but it's not going anywhere just yet. The market doesn't know just yet what the long-term impact is going to be. Right now they're just holding off. Malediction, also a late spike to 40 million, but settling at, you know, 35, 33 million in this case for the sellers. There's not all that much to say here. Manticore staying at 35 million, actually giving back a little bit of ground at the tail end, but 36 for the sellers, 31 for the buyers. Pretty damn expensive for a stealth bomber. Nemesis spiking up to 40 million ISK, giving back ground, but staying at that 35 million price mark, right? 33.6 for the sellers, 32 for the buyers. I would say definitely frigates more than 30 million in general, and that's where they seem to be stabilizing. Purifier next, again, right, stabilizing just above 30 million. And then finally we've got the Saber, which knew another spike up to 90 million ISK, is now also stabilizing at 70 million. So that, I think that's basically going to be the pattern that we'll see. We'll see maybe some trade action, of course. Some people will still be gambling on these, but I think that we'll see all the frigates stabilizing in the 30-35 million price band. Then eventually we'll start to see, if nothing all too drastic happens, we'll see these destroyers also start to stabilize, probably 60 to 70 million price band, something like that. Then eventually that's going to translate into cruisers as well, and then it's going to be the new moon mining mechanic that's going to dictate whether or not we're going to get closer to the previous averages, or if this is here to stay. And that is something that's very tricky to determine at this point. Some Nullsk alliances probably know though. Next up we've got the Tech 3 market at 34.20. Let's take a look at those. Actually, I'm pretty interesting. One lesson that I learned in the war, obviously I was doing some PvE in what I would consider to be a decent throwaway Dominics, right? Pretty good for PvE, but not all that costly at this point. It wasn't fitted all that spectacularly either. Tech 2 drones, nothing all too expensive. But after that one, I actually went out and did some of those sites in the Confessor, and the Confessor is actually a great PvE ship, still costing quite a little bit and actually jumping up in price to 60 million ISK here. Yeah, we're running out of the cheaper supplies here, 55 million for the sellers, 51 for the buyers. Are we seeing a volume spike? A little bit, but not all that much. So the Confessor was actually a great alternative for something that I'll prepare for all my bases of operations for the PvE activity. It's fast enough, but it's also strong enough, sturdy enough, actually has a decent DPS in the sharpshooter mode as well. Definitely a very fun ship to fly around with, and also, well, 50-60 million. It costs something, of course, but it's still gonna be cheaper than the Dominics, and it's actually going to allow you to get out of trouble a little bit more quickly as well. So I like it. Confessor is gonna be part of my doctrines, I would say, in all of my base of operations. One of the lessons I learned in the war, and at the moment it's pretty expensive, coming close to 60 million on a lack of fresh supplies, basically. I think that's how I would call this. The latest one's coming in at 55 million. Maybe a big buyout, but I'm not seeing that here in the volumes. The Hecate next, that one is still settling at 50 million, so I think that the Confessor will drop back down to that eventually on lots of new supply there. 45 million for the sellers, 43 for the buyers. This is a more dangerous pattern, of course. 124 as the one of the latest orders. That's quite dangerous, but hopefully they can switch to Confessor, bring that one back in line a little bit. But here, that is yeah, a bit of oversupply in the Hecate markets, coming under pressure. The Jackdaw next, also settling below 50 million ISK here. 48 for the sellers, 42 for the buyers. Not seeing those crazy sell orders in the latest ones here, so that seems to find its price range. And then we also have this Vapel finally that jumped up but is already coming back down. So jumped up to 50 million, coming back down a little bit on 128 right there, on fresh supplies and some oversupply as well at 45 million. 42.5 for the buyers here. Okay, interesting. So I would say that this Vapel jumped up a little bit, and you can see that it takes a little bit of time for the industry branch of Tech 3 to actually respond to that. And then when they do, they tend to maybe oversupply a little bit all of a sudden here, because that's quite a bit to come in a single sell order. So that is interesting. I think by next week we'll see the Confessor pull back down to 50 million ISK. But the Hecate oversupplied a little bit as well consistently, and then the Jackdaw seems to be the one where you would on average have everything evolve towards a little bit less than 50 million for a destroyer. That's basically what we're looking at in the Tech 3 destroyer market. For the cruisers, let's take a look at that. Legion taking off, quite interesting, up to 160 million, 165 for the sellers, big supply coming in though, and then 155 for the buyers. Volumes and then an increase in price, so some renewed interest in Tech 3 as well. Loki next, actually dropping off after going to 250 million ISK, quite expensive of course, that can't last forever. Decent supply as well with 108 coming in here. 195 million for the first seller. Will that be sustainable? I don't know, because there is lots of interest in the Loki here. Maybe this will get snagged up. Sellers at 208 is possible as well. 194 million for the first buyer too, showing strong interest in the Loki market. Proteus next, going up towards 130, that's quite nice. 136 for the sellers, 126 for the buyers. Good news for the Proteus. The bad news, of course, we still have 320 here. We still have like 500 Protei on the market with the volumes of like 40-50. That's not all too great. It's gonna be some time before all of that's gonna get absorbed. And finally we have the Tengu as well, managing to keep the trades, I would say probably above 170, no, 165 for the sellers. Ooh, and that's bad news, that's really bad news in my opinion. 156 for the buyers, but this here, that's 1,000 Tengus coming on the market a couple of days ago. That is not very good news. That does show that there is this potential oversupply still looming on the Tech 3 market. You have the same problem with the single orders that are coming here for this vehicle. That's a lot. The Proteus still has those 320 here. The Loki 108, that's actually a decent amount for the most popular Tech 3 cruiser. And then here the Hecate as well with 124. The ghost of that oversupply, which was why we had these extremely low prices before the summer, it's still looming for me. It's still something that you need to be aware of. I would never go completely overboard in purchasing on the Tech 3 market at this point personally. But overall, you do have some market force here. For instance, Confessor, I love the ship, some renewed interest, pushing the price up to 60 million. You know, if you manage to buy here at 40 million, that's not bad, right? That's definitely something that you can work with for some trades, but I feel it is quite risky, especially here again now when you can see 1,000 Tengus coming in a couple of days. Just like that, there is more potential out there than there is supply at the moment, which I think makes for a dangerous cocktail if you're looking to buy lots of ships and you want to get profits out of those. So let's move on to our extra product this week at 4030. I chose isotopes and fuels because I'm interested in what's happening here. Fuel prices seem to be decently low. Isotopes coming back here for the helium isotopes a little bit though. Look at that, going for 670. That's definitely above average. So we get 677 for the sellers, 627 for the buyers. Decent supplies for sure, but above average for helium isotopes. And we know that the PI, the fuel PIs, are actually very low. And so I was wondering what was happening in general. Here again, hydrogen isotopes above average. Towards 700, 675 for the sellers, 580 for the buyers. Decent margin, but quite some purchasing happening here. So increased prices. Nitrogen isotopes, the one exception, that's close to 1 year low at 650. 644 for the sellers, 606 for the buyers. So that one is pretty cheap. I'm surprised by the difference between these two. And then we've got the oxygen isotopes actually jumping up to a 1 year high. That's quite unexpected. More than 800 disc all of a sudden. 807 for the sellers, 763 for the buyers. On massive volume, on decent volumes, so like around double the normal averages for a couple of days. Okay, that's not good news for the fuel prices themselves, but you see these mixed pictures in the ice products, in the oxygen isotopes, which means that this was a slight opportunity for oxygen, right? If you happen to have some of that lying around, definitely look to sell that. Potential buy opportunity in nitrogen isotopes, and then, well, regular market forces, but definitely above average for helium isotopes. And then we've got the fuel prices on the other hand. Helium fuel blocks well below average, below 20,000 ISK. So yeah, that's definitely pretty cheap. Hydrogen, same situation, less than 20,000 ISK right here, pretty cheap, well below average. Nitrogen, same thing, well below average, pretty cheap. And then oxygen finally also flat at 20,000 ISK, 9,900 for the sellers. And that is the surprise for me. I think that it does mean that either PI and fuel is in a great buy opportunity right now. And that isotopes might just be, you know, this is an important trigger for fuel prices. Here, that would need to come back, of course. It potentially might. So that's 650 on the charts. Yeah, 644. Nope, that's some dumping happening here. That might actually be a buy opportunity. Look at that dump pattern here. But then this is above average, this is above average, a little bit of a jump up as well. It makes for an interesting mix, right? You've got isotopes, you've got PI, you've got the fuels themselves showing their interconnectivity, and I would say lots of these are actually in a decently interesting position there for some investment. So maybe we'll see this chart here, these goods grow as well. But that's gonna be it for the main EVE talk here. I'll quickly touch on my investments. Here are the construction blocks. I think I bought that here for definitely less than 12k. It's not high enough just yet to sell, but it's still, I think, in slight profit territory. Then coolants, I bought that last week. I might even buy some more this week because that's definitely really cheap, below 10,000 ISK. Still have some liquid ozone lying around. Yeah, probably bought on this dip too early because you can now buy for even cheaper. I should probably double down. I usually buy in batches of like 100 million. Now selling for 83 ISK, buyers at 81.82 ISK. I think I'm just going to try and dollar cost average my way below the 87.5 price line. by making another purchase of liquid ozone, but that was too early a gamble, obviously. Then we have robotics. I have some of that as well, which at the moment is definitely sellable. And then I also still have some strontium, which again, bad purchase. I bought that too early, I think at more than 5k, and now it's actually dropping to 4k. So that is another, I think, where I'm going to try and dollar cost average myself down a little bit with a second purchase at this point. This is pretty crazy though, right? 1 year low price point for Stront. Very cheap at the moment. These are gambles, all right? I'm just gonna give you guys that as background information on some of the gambles that I took. Construction blocks, okay, that one worked out and will probably work out, but strontium, bought too early. Liquid ozone, I bought too early. And here robotics and coolants, I think I may be buying at the right time for those two. Just to give you guys that extra background in what I'm doing in the market as well. Thank you very much for watching, guys, and as always, I'll see you next time.